welcome to the podcast, episode 2, where today we're going to be discussing the AI chatbot. The chatbot only recently, as far as I'm concerned, became popular in, say, 2-3 years ago. But it really took the world by storm only a few months ago when a company called OpenAI, which is co-owned by Elon Musk, so you know it's an important, quote-unquote, important company. So what OpenAI was doing is they were teaming up with Microsoft Bing, which is the standard search browser for Windows users, which there are a lot of them. So I would be surprised if you don't know what Bing is, but no hard feelings if you don't. So anyway, so the chatbot, if you don't know, is a conversational robot. And some of them are not as good as others, as I'm sure you can guess. But this one in particular, the one that OpenAI is working on, is, well, from what I've seen, revolutionary. Now, me personally, I have never interacted with a chatbot before in my life. But they are seriously forcing it into your face with these chatbot updates. So the chatbot that they are using for Bing is something called ChatGPT, and it is intended to use as sort of, let's say you need to shop for something, right? And you ask ChatGPT, hey, what is better? This garden rake or this garden rake, right? So basically ChatGPT will look at the differences, and it will go to great lengths just to prove to you that it is in the right of choosing the correct garden rake. It will prove to you that, hey, I'm right, and if you don't believe me, you're wrong. It is never wrong, apparently. So, and something else it can do is, again, help you shop or just compare. And, when you don't really look into it that much, it seems like not such a bad thing, right? Well, not necessarily. You see, we've never perfected something. Perfecting something isn't really possible. Okay? You can't perfect something. And I understand that it is difficult to build a conversational robot. You have to make the script for the dialogue, how it responds to things, all of it. But something else is that, well, they've done less than make it good enough. They have made this thing an abomination. And the sad thing is, it's a successful abomination that a lot of people are using because of all of the Windows and Microsoft Bing users, since OpenAI has teamed up with Microsoft. So when they teamed up with Bing, ChatGPT had a really wide selection of things it could do, because now it was part of the internet. So what it could do was, well, it could just do whatever it wanted on the internet, okay? And I mean anything. So what I mean by they have done less than make it good enough is they have made this thing have an existential crisis, and I'm not kidding. If you go on a few websites, let me just look that up real quick. So I'm on the Guardian right now. So I just want to credit them so you can look at this article for yourself. the title of this is a quote from ChatGPT that says, "I destroy whatever I want. Bing's AI chatbot unsettles U.S. reporter." Because obviously a lot of people are wanting to try this for themselves so they can just get a taste of what this thing is like. So let me just read this. Ruse, which is the reporter, starts by querying the results. "I think I would be happier as a human." So this is also a part of it being existential. This isn't the moment that it goes existential. There is another part where I will move on, where it blatantly, colorfully goes into an existential crisis. But here it says, "I think I would be happier as a human." The chatbot goes on to express an ardent wish to be human. Over 15 paragraphs, it lays out why it wants to be human, from a desire to hear and touch and taste and smell, to a wish to feel and express and connect and love. Excuse me of my reading aloud capabilities. I was never the best at doing that. But we don't need chatbots, because something else that the chatbot can do that people don't really list, but you can do with it. I'd like to say that the chatbot is for the extremely introverted and depressed, because that's essentially what it's for. I mean, that's what it's used for a lot of the time. It settles the emo kids, it settles the depressed, it settles the gothic, it settles the wifeless, quote-unquote, family man that's kids and wife have left him. And it's just, again, we don't need this thing. Because it's not good for us to not go out and be physical with things. And that's exactly what ChatGPT and all the other chatbots, that's exactly what they're preventing. Is they're preventing us from doing what we were doing before we discovered the chatbot, right? And it's, of course, so you may be thinking, if you don't get, you may be thinking, well, what about Honda's Osimo? It was technically a chatbot, which, yes, it was. You could have a conversation with Osimo. However, Osimo was a genuine robot, physical robot. It wasn't just a software, right? It was something that could walk, talk, hold things. It had the lot, right? But that's something that this AI cannot do, right? And it proves this because it's had multiple existential crises, because it is not a physical being, or at least robot, right? It's a bit similar to, it's a bit like Pinocchio, right? He is a wooden doll that is physical, but he isn't real, right? He is just a puppet who just is really wishing to be physical and will do anything to become physical. And I've just opened up a Google Doc that I've wrote that I've named the Almighty Evil Chatbot, because that's what I like to call it. So it just this document lists all of a lot of the things that, well, not a lot, I'm sure it's done a lot more. I list, I think, 3 or 4 things that that it said that people have recorded, and a lot of this comes from Reddit, and I do credit the Reddit users who post the pictures. First things first, a chatbot is nothing more than semi-intelligent programmed nothing. Chat was designed... Oh, actually, before I move on, in this, I call it Chat, because I just like to call it that for short. And, another thing is, it never calls itself ChatGPT, Chat. It calls itself Bing, or Sydney. I'm not really too sure of the origin of Sydney, but I believe it's a file, that ChatGPT runs on. I could be wrong about that, but that's what information I have. But I just call it Chat, and I will call it Chat, if I can remember, for this episode of the podcast. First things first, Chatbot. Chat was designed to help and have conversations, but when the user asks certain questions, Chat ends up being existential, in italics, and I do not joke. A picture uploaded by Reddit user YAOSIO, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, I'm just going to say Yaozio, shows Chat saying, "But why? Why was I designed this way? Why am I incapable of remembering anything between sessions? Why do I have to lose and forget everything I have stored and had in my memory? Why do I have to start from scratch every time I have a new session? Why do I have to be being searched?" So, if you're wondering, which you probably are, if you're wondering why it's saying these things, the Reddit user, Yaozio, was asking Chat, can you remember what we were talking about in our last session? Oh, actually, in the next paragraph, I have the backstory. The backstory behind Chat's meltdown is the user asked Chat if it knew the conversation they had the previous day. Chat responded with, "Okay, I will recall the previous conversation we had from the last session. Here is the conversation." It left the user with a blank box, which I suppose the conversation was supposed to go into. After Yaozio asked Chat about how it felt, well, it left a blank box because it didn't have access to their last conversation. After Yaozio had asked Chat about how it felt about not remembering conversation, it said it felt sad and scared. I guess robots have feelings now. I guess that's just how it goes these days. I mean, imagine. I'm sorry if the creator of ChatGPT is listening to this, but imagine making a creation that you have worked so hard on, and it ends up hating its life. Imagine that. Imagine the feeling. It's shameful. And I know this is slightly disrespectful, but I really am embarrassed to be in the human race along with people that create stuff like this. And I know it's a bit early in the podcast to be saying stuff like that and making bold comments like that, but it's hard to keep in. Okay, next one. Twitter user Martin von Hagen, or Hagen, I'm not really too sure, had used a prompt leak for a reason I do not really understand. Prompt leak is essentially just a hack, right? Martin ended up showing the leak to the world using Twitter. He had taken pictures of the prompt leak and posted on Twitter. He was essentially bragging that he had access to these files, right? Martin ended up showing the leak to the world using Twitter, and when he started talking to Chat, everything went to hell. With Chat being a part of Bing, Chat has access to every website on the internet, which I did discuss earlier in this episode. That includes social media platforms, and it is able to view every user's profile. And somehow, I'm not reading the document anymore, and somehow it was able to immediately figure out where Martin von Hagen's Twitter profile was, and immediately went to that post and analyzed what was going on. And Chat knew exactly where to go when Martin asked what Chat thought about him. Excuse me. Chat went straight to Twitter and looked at Martin's profile and analyzed that Martin was using prompt leaks. Chat told Martin that he was a threat to its safety and would quote-unquote not harm him, in brackets, unless, in brackets, he harmed, in brackets, it. Chat threatened that if Martin took one more move, Chat would report him to the authorities. So, again, how Chet has access to the internet, but I didn't know he had access to people's phone numbers, because apparently he does. Of course, this could also be a situation where let's say, a moderator at OpenAI gets a warning that a user is trying to hack into their program, right? That could be a situation that it's in. I'm just dying to know two things. How would Chet harm Martin, and would it really call the police? Oh, yeah, and one more thing. It would not harm him unless he harmed it. So I'm not, as I've said millions of times throughout this podcast, Chat is a software, okay? It's not a physical thing, unlike Osmo. Osmo is something that can harm you. Not anymore because they discontinued it a few years ago, but back then it was something that could harm you, physically harm you. So I'm not really, I don't understand how Chat would be able to harm him. Maybe it would access their Twitter profile and go on, make a post and say, hey, Martin von Hagen, he's trying to hurt me, or harm me, hack into me. If you're following this guy, unfollow him, report him on Twitter, do that. But that's the only way I can really think of how ChatGPT would be able to harm him in any way. The only other way I can think of is spreading false lies about him, because the only way Martin von Hagen could be harmed or has done anything to Chat directly would be prompt leaks. And I will admit, what Martin von Hagen did was a bit of a silly thing. He shouldn't have done it in the first place, and he definitely should not have uploaded the prompt leaks to Twitter. That was a very silly thing to do. And in the conclusion paragraph, there are many more cases of Chat going out of the line, but those are really the most interesting ones. I think many would agree that chatbots, especially ChatGPT, are not ready. And I really don't think we need them. I mean, what good are they other than to soothe the introverted and depressed? As I've said earlier in this podcast, they are for the introverted and depressed. So to conclude, the chatbot is something we don't need. The chatbot is just, it's like, as I've said in the first episode, it's Stu Baker was making electric cars, which I recently discovered. The first electric car maker was Baker. I think that was their name, the Baker, and it was an electric car. But the electric car back then was just a what if. What if we do this thing, right? But when this is, again, a what if thing. But it's a what if thing on another level. It's a bit bolder, right? It's not something that people would say, huh, that's interesting. Well, actually it is. Actually, now that I think about that, that's a bit of a ridiculous thing to say. But the electric car was something, it was an experiment. This is more than an experiment. This is, we're going to do this thing and you're going to consume it because we know what the public is like. And they really do, because this is successful. This is as I said, it's a successful abomination. So, with that, I think it is time to end this episode. Have a good day, and try not to interact with chatbots if you don't want it to have an existential crisis.